So, I think, Scott, do you have the ability to mute out our other folks? I think they're muted.
Everybody is muted except for the speakers.
Okay.
So if we're hearing any background noise, it's coming from one of us.
How we doing? I think we're good, right?
Yep. Yeah, I hear a little bit, but I think we're all right.
Okay. If you just joined us, thank you for joining. We're just about to start our executive panel discussion to 2024 employee engagement recognition trends and tips. We're going to give just about 1 minute left for everyone else to join us. Okay, Scott, I think we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited about our executive panel discussion here today. The title of today's panel discussion is 2024 Executive Panel Discussion, Employee Engagement Recognition Trends and Tips. What we will be doing today, just in terms of the ground rules, are we will enable the chat function. So as we go through our discussion with our panelists, if you have a relevant question or inquiry, we do have a couple of people that will be manning the chat. They will funnel those questions vetted over to me, and we will ask our panelists. In the event we do not get to your question, don't panic. We're going to follow up after this panel discussion, and you do have an opportunity to ask one of a couple different senior leaders in the space, and you can ask specific questions about your industry, size of company, what we're seeing globally. You will also have the ability to reach out to our very generous panelists today, and we'll give you information on how to connect with them. So use the chat if you have a question. In the alternative, following this webinar, there will be a quick email. You can just set up a very brief meeting, or you can reach out to the panelists. So with that said, we're going to go, Scott, you can bring us to our agenda today. Great. So how are we going to use our time today? First, we're going to talk about the trends. All of us are experiencing post-COVID world, and we're going to give you some updates from some of the senior data that's out there today. Then we're going to go through understanding employee needs, what we're seeing, engaging employees, and recognizing employees. Next slide. So what are we seeing in 2024 different from 2023? Well, number one, it's a tight job market. Job market remains tight, especially US, North America, and in various parts of the globe. So people are looking around for other jobs. Why is that? 83% of employees are not engaged at work. This source comes from Gallup. What does that mean? That means by varying levels, people are not fully engaged and participating in their present employment position. 33% of new hires are leaving within 90 days, and 51% of all employees are either passively or actively looking for the next job. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we have a huge rise in disengagement that's occurring. What does that mean? $4,700 is the average cost of acquiring a new frontline employee, just the acquisition. That continues to go up and to the right. And the cost of disengagement is 34% of an annual salary. So everyone gets this. A lot of people on this call are either directly affected or directly impacted by these numbers, but we have a crisis regarding employee engagement. Next slide. Okay, next, companies believe they are engaging employees. So there's a disconnect. If you ask any of the people and we say, hey, raise your hands, are you engaging employees? Are you getting employees involved? They'll say, yes, of course we're doing things for our employees. So executives will say, 90% of them will say, sure, we're recognizing employees, we're getting them engaged. If you go to the actual field employees, only 68% of those people are saying, hey, they've received any recognition. And if you go down the scale and if you ask, hey, Gen Z workers or millennials, most of those individuals, 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5 are saying, hey, we feel excluded at work. But on the same token, there is a sense of greater belonging when they're checked in on or when those communities are created. So what do we have? We have an engagement crisis. We also have a disconnect. We think we're doing things for engagement, but frontline workers are saying, hey, no, or those people that are not on the executive teams are saying, nah, we're not really getting that engaged. So we have a problem. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to pause there. And as we pause, I want to just talk very briefly about who we have on our panel today. And then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts. So we have a very distinguished panel. I'm going to start with Janet Livingstone. Janet Livingstone is of Boeing, small company, about 156,000 employees in 60 different countries. Janet has spent 30 years in leadership development, in coaching, program management. She's lived in over 5 different countries. In addition to her role at Boeing on a very strategic level, she also speaks 6 languages. She does a podcast. She's an author. In the broader scope, Janet is very involved with executive coaching, multiple different levels, different teams. So Janet brings a wealth of knowledge around development, engagement, and we're happy to have her. In addition, we have Dr. Randy Stovall. Randy has over 30 years in and around HR technology, both as an advisor, as a leader, as a senior exec, multiple different industries. And Randy is solution focused. He's, as a senior exec, he's helped with staffing, recruiting, technology, HR, nonprofits, you name it. Currently, he is director at Comfort Systems, 11,000 employees. It's New York Stock Exchange, FIX, and that Comfort Systems is heating, cooling company and multiple different subsidiaries across the country. And last, we have Louisa Cartwright. Louisa is a expert at scaling kind of B series up through D series companies. She's done it on 3 different occasions. Formerly Vice President, Chief of Staff at Headspace, now Vice President of both people and operations at JobGet. JobGet is a social job network. They are expanding quickly for everyday workers. And Louisa has a broad range of experience where she uses her product design and background in product design really to apply to systems, data-driven flows, both people and operations. So we've got a really good panel ahead of us, and we're going to start off with employee needs. So Scott, back to employee needs. Great. So we're going to steal a little bit from the Josh Bersin company. Josh Bersin has a bunch of colleagues that crunches a lot of data. They said, hey, what is the most important with our employees today? And they came up with about 6 different key items and then rated those in terms of moderate to very high. The most important thing that employees are telling employers they want is, number 1, trust in company, right? There's a mission, a purpose behind what we do, an investment in people, transparency and empathy, integrity of leadership, and inclusiveness, diversity, that supportive workplace. But very closely behind that is career growth opportunities, is this idea of strong leadership, purposeful work, and well-being. So for a long time, we would have top down, hey, here's what you need. Here's how we're going to recognize you. And now there's a shift as we've gone into this remote world where we're saying, hey, we need to find out how our employees work, and with multi-generations, what motivates them. So we're going to pause for a second, and we're going to ask the panel a very broad question. We're going to go round robin here, and we're going to say, hey, panel, how do you personally look for employee needs in your organizations, or what are you seeing in the marketplace to try to decide, hey, what our employees need to begin this engagement and recognition? So we'll start with Janet, we'll move to Randy, and then Louisa.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here. So we use employee surveys to try to get sort of the pulse of what's happening. And those surveys are not just multiple choice, but they include 3 answers. So people get the opportunity to describe what it is they're feeling, or what they're lacking, or what they would like to see improve. And we do try to schedule at least 1 to 2 offsites on the various teams that I work with, and those happen annually, and then get the feedback from that. But there's no replacement for team leaders and others soliciting one-on-one feedback, just talking to people, asking them what they're needing, how they're feeling, what's their trust level now, if there's psychological safety. And so, there are a huge variety of ways that you can try to discern needs. For me, the real challenge is addressing them.
Great. And let's hear from Randy.
Thanks again, Matt. I mean, this is the 3rd time you guys have had me, so I don't know what punishment you're trying to incur on yourselves, but I really appreciate the chance to be with people like Janet and Louisa to discuss some of these things. So, when I was looking at the slides earlier that you showed, I think I have to turn it back a little bit to answer that question some. And it's really looking back at the kind of, the employees that we have. Right now, we're working with millennials who are winding down their career, many of them, Gen Zs, and we might as well say Gen Alpha because they're already coming into play, right? The kind of engagement they expect and that they've grown used to, and the kind of recognition they've grown used to, is completely different than what it was for my generation. And I think that a lot of times one of the mistakes that we make is we try to have them conform to what we expect rather than just really clearing and erasing the blackboard and just starting from scratch. So yes, I think I agree with what Janet said. It is talking about employment engagement and what do they expect and what are they looking for. But I think we should just prepare ourselves that what they're looking for is going to be very, very different than what we were used to seeing 15 or 20 years ago. I mentioned this in one of our other discussions that when I was playing baseball, when I was a kid growing up, if you didn't win, you didn't get a trophy. Now everybody gets a trophy, right? And that's just the world we've created, and I think we have to adapt towards it. It really doesn't surprise me also the numbers that you showed, or the stat you showed on companies believing that they're engaged when they're really not. And for our people that are out there, those of you who joined us, and really thank you for your time. I know how busy all of you are. I think you can cut through a lot of the fat if that's a true statement or not, is just simply by asking, do you have a budget for employee retention and employee recognition? Because I don't know what the numbers were for 2023, but I think 2022, it was over 80% of companies have absolutely no budget set aside to do employee recognition to be able to increase their retention. And whenever you're watching these crime dramas and everything else, the statement is usually follow the money, and that'll lead you to the truth. And I think it's true in this statement too. If the money's not budgeted out, it's probably not happening the way that they would like to think that it is.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Louisa?
Yeah. What a great question. So when I think about this, first of all, even just looking at the panel here, as human beings, we're so all incredibly different, right? We have such different needs. And that's the same whether you might be watching and you're a Series A company or you're a Series D company, you might be a public company, you might be 70 employees, you might be 5,000 employees, 10,000 employees, right? Everything is different and there are so many different human beings within that environment. So the first thing is kind of, as Janet and Randy both said, is really understanding who are your customers, who are your employees. And I think of our employees as customers, right? As a people leader, they're my customer. So I have to start by really, truly understanding what are the needs of my customers? What cohorts do they fit into? We'll have different groups. It won't be a one size fits all, right? What worked at the last company won't necessarily work here. What works for one cohort of your employees won't work necessarily for another. So we really need to take kind of like a data-driven approach to truly understanding some of that. And I like to think about it in like a Venn diagram, right? So you have your employees' needs and really getting to understand what they need. But you also have like constraints around the business, right? What can the business kind of realistically do and afford? But then also you need to be looking at the market, right? Our number one goal is to win and retain the best talent. That's our goal, right? And so we really need to be looking at what others are doing in the market, what's the expectation. And by combining those two things, I think that place in the center is a good starting point for really starting to put a strategy together as like, what could employee engagement look like?
That's great. Okay, thanks, panel. That's a great segue, Louisa, into this concept of, okay, well, how do we engage employees? All right, so we may have done a survey, we may, have done some in-person meetings or feedback from our leaders. What are we seeing out in the marketplace? So we're part of Advantage Club. We have 4 million users, 120 countries. And so what do we see with our client base? We're seeing more and different employee experiences. And this bears out from both Deloitte and McKinsey studies, right? We're seeing different ways to engage employees. And this is not only in office or hybrid, but it's also virtual. So we're looking for different and meaningful feedback. We're looking for career development and training as different experiences. Contests, and the contests are not just sales or revenue contests. Contests we're seeing could be simply frontline employees on attendance or safety or things that are universal to everyone, volunteer hours, so different ways of cutting contests. Social activity in groups, not only the formal employee resource groups or DEI groups, but all sorts of groups, individual functional groups, individual geography groups, sports, music, all sorts of things to get those communities, and then just good old-fashioned events and fun. But as opposed to just the happy hour or the virtual happy hour, we're seeing different ways to engage employees. Some of that is coffees with the CEO. Some of that is setting up time where people get to go to different experiences or setting up lunch and learns, so various ways, but we're seeing a lot more intention upon creating more and different employee experiences. Next slide. We also want to point out, we get asked the question, well, what is the best companies doing? And I would say there's not a formula there, except they're doing more, but they're doing it consistently. And this came out of a Spencer Stewart, one of the big 5 executive search companies, put together this idea of, hey, it's not only the experiences, but you have to be consistent. So the once a quarter happy hour could be good, but doing consistent leadership each and every week or bi-weekly is better. That provides a better, more consistent engagement. By the way, engagement equals productivity, equals better satisfaction, equals better retention. So we're seeing more and more consistency. So with that, we're going to pause. And we're going to go back to our expert panel. And we're going to start with Randy this time. And as we do that, I just want to make sure all of our panelists, if you can kind of mute the background, or I don't know if Scott, Gretchen, Tristan, might be a little bit of noise in the background there. If you can mute that, and then we're going to go on to Randy. And we're going to, hey, what are you seeing in terms of recognizing employees? We'll go around the horn.
Yeah, and quarterly recognition, I think, is the first thing we have to understand, that with most of our workers, it doesn't work. Our attention span is not that good in general, as just as humans. So I think being able to be more consistent and also more frequent is very, very big. And again, just kind of going back on what's important to them. Some of the things that surprised me early on in this was how much people now are valuing contributions made by their company to social justice and social good and other programs that are out there, where it doesn't involve receiving money or them receiving a gift, but actually being able to give back. So just recalling again that we need to really listen to what's happening. The full circle that Matt mentioned earlier is, I'm a firm believer that talent acquisition is talent retention, and talent retention is talent acquisition. If we could hold on to the people that we lose, about a third of our problems would be over. And to be, it's. I think sometimes we look at it, we say, well, or maybe even leaders do it, and they say, well, it's not really, is it really worth the time? And the answer is yes. If you could have back 40% of the workforce that you're having to replace this year, what would your company look like? So part of that also, I think, is on the upskilling side. We all know that if we take the time to upskill one of our people or some of our people, their likelihood of staying with the company, it just goes up dramatically. I think this has to start from day one. Matt mentioned that a large portion of people dropping out within the first 6 months of employment, and that all starts with a bad onboarding experience and just steamrolls from there. So that engagement, I think, needs to take place to show them that they're not a number, they're not an employee number, that they are people that we listen to and we pay attention to what's going on. Quarterly, that's great, but I think it has to be done a lot more frequently than that, especially with the younger workforce. And the work that I'm in now with our company, we're in skilled trades, and a large volume of our workforce is under 30. And if you think that once a quarter is going to make them happy, it's just not going to work.
Great. All right, Louisa.
Yes. So when I think about the tactics, and I see these a little bit more of tactics, I kind of want to pull out a little bit and say that for me, I think what's really important to talk about is that the foundation has to be there. People have to feel fairly compensated for the work that they do, right? I know often we're talking about maybe corporate workers, but there's frontline workers in some of these larger organizations and things like this, all different types of worker populations. So I think, first of all, having a happy hour is probably not going to resonate with folks if they don't feel that they're fairly compensated for the work that they do, for example. They don't feel that there's trust there in the organization. There's some basic needs within the organization that I think we need to make sure that are established and affirm before we can start kind of building on top of those. Randy, you mentioned like donating to social justice, and I think that speaks into having that trust for your organization, seeing them making an impact. And I think these things are really important before we kind of get into those tactics of what these different engagement things could look like. It could be a happy hour, but it could just be a really good, healthy one-on-one conversation with your manager where you're getting great feedback and you're being coached properly, right? So again, going back to understanding the workforce, this looks very, very different for different cohorts of employees. But I think before we even go there, we have to truly understand, does my employee population really, truly believe that they're getting compensated fairly for the work that they do? Does they feel there's trust there? Do they trust leadership? Do they understand why decisions get made? These are the things that are going to be kind of crucial to have in place. Otherwise, the other stuff is just not going to kind of hold firm in terms of really making an impact.
Great. Janet?
Yeah. Thank you, Louisa and Randy. Yeah, so much of this resonates with me. As Louisa said, I think it's good here to take a step back, that cultivating trust really depends on the quality of the relationships you have in the workplace with your peers, with your leaders, and with others from other parts of the organization that you may or may not come into contact with very often. We know from the famous Harvard longitudinal study that happened over 83 years that the single most important factor in self-reported happiness and longevity is positive relationships. Now, what that means is that one has to exist inside a corporate culture that encourages people to cultivate their relationships, to talk with each other, that encourages people taking time to do that, that encourages leaders to, as Louisa mentioned, spend time one-on-one with their employees, talking with them, listening to them fully. If you look across the board, if you did a huge survey about people across the board in all sorts of companies, what you would probably find is that the interactions that they have, that teams have with their leaders and with themselves, is top down. Somebody gets up and presents, whatever platform they use, it doesn't matter, but it's monodirectional. The power of running a meeting and having leaders who understand how to facilitate meetings, for example, where they ask open-ended questions, where they put on icebreakers that are meaningful, that get people to actually talk with each other, that builds huge rapport. And it's very important at the end of the day, because I can be compensated fairly. I can believe in all the donations that are being sent to nature.org or to, Save the Children, doesn't matter. But if I don't feel close to my colleagues, if I feel alone in a crowd, then I'm not going to be happy about continuing to work at that particular company, even if I like the topic that I'm focused on. We have to feel connected. People are social animals. We need a collective, and that collective can be created virtually and in person. So I'm with Randy on this, it's really worth investing in in-person events and retreats and whatever you want to call them, because those are real opportunities for people to get to know each other. My team comes from 7 countries. Once a year, we all get to come together, and it's joyous. That is what makes my relationships with my colleagues, not the, exchange of the usual emails. It's really about feeling the dynamic, feeling that energy, getting those hormones that we all need. I have a story to tell, but I think I'll wait. I think I'll let somebody else talk now.
Well, you're leaving us hanging a bit, Janet. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'm gonna stick with this one because it's related to this idea of engagement recognition. For the panel, question, 2 different forms of questions that came in, but it says, could you speak to the role of managers in fostering engagement and how to get those managers to be more effective in fostering engagement? So, Janet, I know this is up your alley, but also all 3 of you spoke to this. Let's just go really quickly. I'll let any of you that want to speak to this. How do we discuss this amongst our managers? Go ahead, Janet, if you want. Kick us off.
Okay. So I really, truly believe that managers need to bring their folks together, need to be authentic with their folks. And that takes some skills. And a lot of managers get promoted to manager from a technical role where they excelled. But then they find themselves having to manage people, and they really don't have the training for that, and they don't have the support for that within the company. I'm not sure why the expectation is that they are just automatically able to manage people, but a lot of times it doesn't happen. Not all the time. So here's an example. So with the Boeing Global Strategic Initiatives team, we're very used to having what we call a flow down. So that's basically just meetings where there's a ton of information that comes down, and that goes on. And then at the end of the meeting, there's the question, team, what are your questions? And I feel like I'm in, it feels like school. So here's what I do, and I would recommend that all managers get meeting facilitation skills. Here's what I just did. As you all know, or probably most of you know, Boeing is struggling with quality issues, with being covered in the media in a very sensational way. And so there's some real emotion happening. It's heavy at Boeing, and you can feel it. You know, people are down. And we had our offsite. We were 30 people in the room, and I got up and said, hey, this is a really hard time. We're carrying all this emotion. I think we need to name it. I think we need to get it out. So let me start. And I modeled it. I just said, I'm feeling really sad. And I looked at the group, and these are, you know, engineers. Many of them are very introverted. They're all wonderful and smart. I didn't have to wait 2 seconds, and people started coming. It came like popcorn. Angry, disappointed, uncertain. 2 seconds, guilt. And it was like, wow. It was very intense. And then I said, okay, now we're going to get them out. Here is a way. And I put up I lived in Slovakia for many years. I put up 2 words in Slovak, dokelu, which is an expression that basically expresses frustration and disappointment all at once. And it's like, dokelu, like, you know, I'm not going to say the equivalent in English. And there are other ways you can say that. The actual direct translation of it is into the cabbage. You can imagine that there are other variations of that expression, into other things, which I will not say here. But I asked everybody to join me and to say this out loud. And the whole group said it a couple times. At first they were shy, then they started. Then I said, okay, come with me. Physically, let's add the physical body, because we completely ignore somatic stuff when we hold meetings, right? Usually. So I said, join me. And I banged on the table, and I said, bang on the table with me. The whole room was banging on the table like crazy. Then I asked them, hey, we represent lots of cultures in this room, lots of languages. Bring your own expression. If you don't feel comfortable bringing an expression like this, make one up. Teach it to your tables. And they came, and they started explaining stuff, and they wrote them on the board, and we were laughing. And the energy in the room increased by about 50 to 60%, if not 100. And the next presenters who got up were like, we like the way we started. And I got comments from it afterward as well. It's really worth addressing these things head on. If you're a leader and you sense that things are not going well and you're curious, ask and listen, and then bring a way for people to deal with it. That's my story.
That's great, Janet. All right, Randy, Louisa.
Well, I agree with everything. Thanks for sharing that. That took courage, and I appreciate you sharing that. I'd be afraid to get in the room with a bunch of construction people that have hammers and all kinds of things and ask them to start banging on something, but I respect you for doing that. You know, we say a couple of things all the time. You know, people might join your company for the money, but they stay for the culture. And on the other side of it, we have heard things like people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And if we think that there's any portion of that that's true, and I am kind of been on, like I said, these calls a bit, Matt knows I'm going to be pretty blunt. If that's true, then some of our managers just don't need to be in a position to be a manager. And maybe that means you slow down their career development to help them to take the time to do it, but you don't do it at the sacrifice of others. Maybe there's a place that's more valuable for them in an organization than in leading people. But I always say that when I'm looking for someone that is a manager, can grow into be a manager, I always like to look for fat people. And fat is faithful, available, and teachable. And if they can't have that teachable mentality, where we can mentor them as leaders, where they can in turn mentor other future leaders, I think you have to ask that hard question of, are you really where you want to be? And that's hard to say. And I know that people are out there probably listening saying, yeah, we can't do that. It's hard enough to find somebody. But I think the long-term harm outweighs being able to take the action that needs to be taken. And again, it doesn't mean that you get rid of them. It just might mean you slow them down, you put them in a different situation, you put them with someone who can in turn mentor them and has been there and done that. Believe me, that person is not the only person at that company that maybe has a hard time working with people or mentoring. So again, listening, putting them into groups, but really just quite honestly facing the truth.
Okay. Louisa?
Yeah, thanks. So many great perspectives here. I'll just maybe quickly add something a little bit more tactical, just to kind of mix it up a little bit. I think we can't get away from it in a lot of cases. We do make really strong ICs managers, and it is a challenge that a lot of organizations face. So what are some kind of tactics we can use? I think having very clear like manager pillars or manager principles, right? And having those principles and kind of coaching your team about them, taking one a week and coaching and giving them examples of how to use it. Experience, education, exposure. They need experience. It's going to come with time. Education can come through the text, looking at that, what those principles are, and then watching you be a manager. You're the manager, right? So, it's almost like train the trainer. It's like spend that time to coach and show and give examples of kind of how you do that. And then another way to kind of understand how that might be going is within our engagement surveys. We do them quarterly. We ask some particular manager effectiveness questions. One around my manager cares about my overall well-being and success. One about feedback, continuously giving me feedback, and one about purpose and coaching me and to grow, to learn and grow. And I think by asking these questions and understanding where those gaps might be within the organization is also another really interesting way to kind of be able to dive in and kind of say, okay, there seems to be some challenges here with the things that we're expecting from our managers within this group. And you can kind of lean in and kind of focus on those. So there's just some tactical approaches to maybe how to overcome when the reality is a lot of times we do promote ICs into this manager role, and there's just some ways to potentially approach it.
Okay, great stuff. Good tactics across the board for the audience. Okay, let's move on to now we've talked about finding needs and engagement. Let's talk about the pure recognition. So what's out there on the research? Well, in the last 2 years, we've seen a bit of a change, and that is recognition has changed. Recognition has become more frequent and more personal. So what are the pillars that we're seeing? We're seeing this recognition done for service markers. What I mean by service markers is areas where we may be managing people to attendance, or we talked about safety, we've talked about customer support. Those become ways and avenues for automated recognition or recognition amongst the team, the peers, or your managers. So 30 days on the job, that's a time that you can recognize someone that traditionally we haven't recognized, or more publicly recognize someone, right? Birthdays, anniversaries, we're seeing these automated. And not just how old are you, but a chance to celebrate someone's service, someone's birthday. Employee resource group, we see more and more automation around this. So defining whether it's diversity or development or inclusion, these resource groups that we see automated, and we're seeing more abilities for people to step up, participate, and recognize things that are being done in these areas. Learning and achievement, we're seeing more gamification around skill sets, pillars, management development, and then finally, just leaderboards in general. Not just on sales, right? But leaderboards for all sorts of things that we value as an organization. Leaderboards for customer feedback, leaderboards for peer help, leaderboards for volunteerism, all sorts of other ways. So we're seeing more recognition, top down and side to side, and more opportunities for this recognition. So let's go one more slide. And nothing beats the good old-fashioned thank you card, or just the, hey, I appreciate it. Legitimate, authentic feedback, right? So let's go to our panel. And let's get a little bit more specific from engagement into actual recognition. What are you seeing in your personal organizations or in the marketplace? Recognition that's working. So if you can provide any tips, tricks, good or bad for the audience on what's working with recognition. And this time we'll start with Louisa and we'll go around the horn.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I know I sound like a broken record. I just want to be clear that this is really important. This is different for every organization and every cohort, right, of your employee group. So when I share these, it wouldn't necessarily be something I would do at every organization. One of the things that is working well at my current organization is we do something called values awards. Why I like this is the culture of the company is about shared values and attitudes and standards, right? And how can we continue to kind of reinforce that? And one of the things that we do is values awards. So every month you can nominate your peers for a values award. And then we talk about that in our town hall. The person wins that award and we talk about how they've kind of demonstrated our values or our values in action. And that's a really great way of continuing to kind of reinforce culture, reinforce values, and kind of see it encouraged in behaviors within the organization. So that's one that I'm a big fan of as well. And then I will just kind of go back again to that regular one-on-one. That manager-employee relationship is kind of one of the most important relationships at the organization. So get to know your employees personally. What do they like? What motivates them, right? People have different motivators, things that kind of make them feel recognized. And it could be as simple as, remembering what they did last weekend or saying what they were going to do at the weekend and talking to them about it. It could be something personal like that. Or it could be they like to be called out in a group setting for something that they've done well, right? Or some people don't like to be called out in a group setting for something they've done well, right? So really understanding what your employee needs and what those motivators are, I think really starting with the personal is so important. And then you can kind of grow outwards from there.
Great. I'm going to go to Janet.
Yeah, thank you, Louisa. That resonates with me so much that you really do need to perpetuate the one-on-one, because everybody understands recognition differently. There are lots of people who don't like to be recognized in public because it's too much. It's too much focus on them. It feels uncomfortable. There are others who will compete like crazy to get to be on that stage and hold that award. And if you have international dispersed teams, those differences become more numerous and they may become broader. So again, for managers, we have a whole skill set that is coming into focus here that's essential to making recognition effective, and raising engagement, and that is relationship skills, making time to go one-on-one, on the phone, on the platform, or live in the office, learning how to run meetings in a sensitive and authentic way that encourages ownership of the team, and that's a whole facilitation skill set that includes listening and learning how to ask questions and being willing to learn, how to, bring exercises and techniques that help people to connect with each other and discuss with each other during meetings, and to be vulnerable. Leaders, need to work on their own self-awareness and their own happiness in order to be courageous enough to be vulnerable with their team and model the behaviors that they would like to encourage on their team and the behaviors that make team members feel good. So this, I like the fact that Advantage is building this, because I think Advantage has a lot to offer, especially in terms of, the fun one-on-one events. And I really, really recommend that companies invest in one-on-one meetings. But before doing that, there should be some, taking of the pulse. Ask people what they would feel safe doing, what interests them, how, when, we really have to listen to our employees. It's absolutely key. Thanks.
That's great. Randy?
Well, these ladies cover it so well, it's hard to, I don't want to go last anymore. I agree with I agree with everything that they say on this. I think maybe in just looking at it, I have to say, and this just really backs up what they've already said, but know your audience. Know what is going to gather their attention and what is going to help them. Going back to, the very first part, a Gen Alpha is going to be completely different than what a millennial might want. And there are different stages in their career. So know your audience. You can't force feed them and expect it to work. Consistency, I think, is huge. Once you have that formula in place, then, use those tactics to be able to maintain a consistency so that, it's not just a one and done type of thing, but it's something that they'll brag about to their other friends and people who need to join that company. Part of acquisition is referrals, and referrals come when people are happy. And I don't mean reading Yelp or Glassdoor. I mean really hearing it from somebody. And I love the way that Louisa breaks everything up, looks at it strategically and tactically. My head kind of thinks that same way, which might scare you that I think like you, Louisa, or you think like me. But just kind of going back on the old Sun Tzu thought, which is victorious, warriors win the battle and then they go to war. And I think that you have to have a good strategic plan and take a look at everything that's out there. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to recognize our employees more and just jump into it with a tactic. You need a strategic perspective of how to win the war, not just win the battle. And that takes an investment of time, energy, and of course, money.
Absolutely. Can I chime in here again?
You bet.
Matt, I think it's important to recognize that we're dealing with this is a really serious issue at a serious time. Not to put a damper on the mood, but the gap that you showed in the first slide between how companies think that they're engaging employees, but then it goes from 94 to like 68% that the employees are actually feeling engaged. That gap is really serious. And I believe that the whole topic of mental health needs to be intentionally addressed from the top down and the bottom up. There's nobody who should not be thinking about this. The current stats I saw in Forbes were shocking. We have something like 42 million people in the US who are suffering from anxiety, and those are diagnosable conditions. We have 21 million depressed. We have anxiety and depression across the board that's rising, and those things, anxiety, depression, and PTSD, are higher. They exist at higher levels now in the younger generations in Gen Z, amongst Gen Z and millennials. So saying the words mental health and recognizing that we have to intentionally think about what the mental health is of our employees. They may be trying very, very hard to hide it, but it's there. That is essential, and it deserves all of the strategic thinking that we would give to anything else. So I just want to say that.
Yeah. No, great point. Scott, if we can move on, just to give everyone a quick pulse check. We have about 8 minutes left. We're going to do a couple quick slides, and then we're going to hear a round robin on kind of the last 60 seconds roundup from everybody. So as we move forward, I think that's a really good point. It's mental health. It's this connection. And we talk about it in terms of experience or engagement or recognition. It's connecting those individuals. And what do we see? Well, we see, and we have the data now that says, hey, it's hard to do, and we're in a crisis. But if you make efforts, there's a huge return on investment. So what do you see? And these are from various studies. This came from Microsoft as well as Gallup. Higher productivity, lower turnover, higher revenue per employee, lower absenteeism, and higher customer satisfaction. So whether you're in HR or not in HR, or whether you have a senior position or executive position, we all have a duty to say, hey, there is a business case to spend more time on people, and it couldn't be more important than now. The macroeconomics are in play. And so when we invest in these things like engagement and recognition, it pays off. And it pays off not only for the employees in terms of well-being, but also corresponding for the business, right? Next slide. So we're going to close with this, Doug Conant. To win the marketplace, you must first win the workplace. All right. And then we'll go to our final question of the day, which is, hey, in kind of 60 seconds or less, or as best we can, let's do a quick wrap on any final tips, tricks, words of wisdom for our audience today as we part our joint time here together. So I'm going to start with Randy, then Louisa, then Janet. So Randy, you're on the spot first, like you requested.
You don't have to listen to me so literally, Matt, you know that. But well, again, thanks for the time. I know that you guys don't have it, and the fact that you gave us a big chunk out of your day, we appreciate that. And I think that I would just have to start somewhere. If this is all confusing first time, if you're frustrated by retention, by what's going on, I so much agree with what Janet said on safety. We're in the commercial and industrial space in this current company that I'm with, and somebody who is suffering in that way on top of a 50-story building, it's more than just mental, it's physical health and welfare of that person and that person's family. So if find a place to start, but don't be afraid to ask questions. Seek out, people that you can talk to, people that you respect, so that you can start gaining further ideas. Matt and the team over there have been a great help to us. We're trying to engage more of our highly decentralized as a company, and we're trying to engage more of our people in ways like this. And we don't always have the answers. Sometimes they don't have all the answers, but together we're making some progress. To me, the worst thing you can do is nothing. So at least, take a good, honest look at yourself. And again, I would start with, if you don't have a budget, then please don't try to convince me that employee retention and value is important. So if you have to have some place to start, that's the first one. And then there are resources that are out there that can really help you to kind of, get the rubber on the road. And again, thank you, Janet, Louisa, it's been a pleasure.
Great. Louisa.
Yes. Okay, so I think that we all agree at this point that life and work aren't separate, and every human being is a unique individual. So my kind of summary and wrap up would be, get curious, ask questions. And I think what happens is when you really do that and let go of any preconceived ideas of what you think engagement looks like, or what you think happiness looks like, or what you think work and life looks like, themes will start to emerge from your workforce. You'll start to see themes. And then as, people leaders, we will just start to realize, okay, this is how I can connect and help these human beings, right? The answers will come for themselves. So I really just say, get curious, and remember, everybody is an individual, unique human going through unique challenges. As they say in Buddhism, life is suffering, right? We're all suffering on some level. So I think get curious, understand what those challenges are. And I think from there, you can really come up with some wonderful and simple ideas in how to engage your workforce. And yes, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Matt. This has been awesome. And I've loved learning from all of you as well. So thank you.
Great.
Can I just throw in one other thing real quick, because I like what you said, Louisa, about be curious. But I'll throw another word in there on you too, and that's be willing to be a disruptor. Disruption is sometimes, not all chaos is necessarily bad if it offers towards good change. And to be able to go into an organization that you might be in that might be, 20, 30, 50, 100 years old, change does not come easily. And sometimes being a disruptor not in a bad way, but in a way that really questions the norm, has to be done. And God bless the people that are those disruptors that are out there that keep us on our toes and looking forward.
That's great. All right, Janet.
Yeah. So life is suffering, and I'm suffering to come up with a unique response to this. Everything that's been said echoes with me so much. The business case is there. We need to communicate it effectively. I would add to it that it doesn't just cost money to lose employees and have to acquire more talent. It costs us time. And that is time taken away from what we could be doing to cultivate a culture of psychological safety and relationship building. There can be huge loneliness inside the company, in a crowd. We've all probably felt that. And loneliness is worse for our health than smoking or alcoholism. It is the number one bad thing that we need to avoid. And we don't want to create companies that are microcosms for that. We have an opportunity now. We have so much information. We have an opportunity to cultivate our relationships with each other. And that is what will lead to engagement and satisfaction.
Thank you. Well, quick thank you to all our panelists. We've had some terrific feedback that's come immediately off the chat. Just a reminder, everyone that has stayed on, you will receive an email today. In that email will be links to our speakers today and the opportunity to follow up with questions. So that will be coming out today. And again, thank you all for your participation. This is a hot topic. It's an important topic. Really appreciate the thought leadership today. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to be with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.